Hello there, and welcome back to Hydroponics Daily, your go-to podcast for everything soilless cultivation. I'm your host, Dr. Russell Sharp, the founder of Utrema Limited. We make fertilizers, biostimulants, and interesting biopesticides. Today, I wanted to talk about something that is often cited and referenced in hydroponic literature, and that is Liebig's law of the minimum. And this states that growth is controlled not by the total amount of fertilizer available or nutrition available, but the scarcest one. So if a plant has plenty of nitrogen and sunlight, but very little phosphorus, its growth will be limited by phosphorus, no matter how much of the other resources you add. And this is visualized by a barrel, and the slats of the barrel is each one a different plant nutrient. And if, say, phosphorus is really short, then you can only fill the barrel with yield as far as the phosphorus slat goes. Obviously, if it was liquid, it would just fall out wherever the phosphorus was, even if the slat for nitrogen and boron and potassium were really high. Now, this is a really good way for students to visualize the Liebig's law of the minimum and the idea that if you've got one limiting factor, that will be your cap on yield and your quality of your crop in hydroponics or any type of growing. Now, that is true to some extent, and it's a really good way of learning about fertilizers and thinking about how you fertilize. But it doesn't mean it's the absolute truth. And that's where I've got an issue with it and how it's used. Sometimes in hydroponics, it's given as it's the law, or even worse, it's if you say, oh, we comply with Liebig's law of the minimum, so we are at the forefront of science. This is like Victorian 19th century scientific principles. And the world of nutrition and plant physiology and crop nutrition has moved on a lot since then. So banging on that you comply with Liebig's law of the minimum is a bit silly. It's a bit like, saying, well, our motor vehicles are really good because we comply with how, Daimler built their cars back at the turn of the century or whenever the Daimler was hanging around. So even some brands even have Liebig on their label and shout about it. I just want to go on some of the limitations about Liebig's law of the minimum. It assumes that there's only one limiting factor at a time, whereas in real systems, often you have multiple interacting constraints, water, temperature, and nutrients, and these can compound or interact in a non-linear way. So it's not always a single bottleneck. And probably the most crucial one is they ignore factors that interact. Now, especially nitrogen. If you apply loads and loads of nitrogen, plants will overconsume that nitrogen to the point where they then require more phosphorus and potassium than would otherwise be required. So if you increase the size of the slat for nitrogen, suddenly the phosphorus and the potassium ones go down, and the whole barrel analogy just falls apart. Literally, the barrel just falls apart. So, and the converse can be the true. If another nutrients can inhibit the uptake of others. So calcium can inhibit magnesium uptake and things like this. So the slats interact. And so, the barrel analogy falls down there. And growth response curves are non-additive. So one resource can modify how others work. And then it's also a static view of what is essentially a dynamic system when you grow plants. So it's treating it as fixed, but in reality, things change over time. So in the morning, light might be limited. In the afternoon, if you're growing in a greenhouse, water stress might become more of a limiting factor. And in the autumn, pests might dominate as you get further on through the growing season. It doesn't account for biological adaptation. So plants and any sort of organism can adjust its physiology, but to partially compensate for limitations. If you don't give enough potassium, plants can use sodium sometimes in the enzymes. It's not perfect and it can cause issues, but say a beet plant, sugar beet or Swiss chard can do that. So they can swap out potassium for sodium, and so they can do adaptations there. It ignores thresholds and saturations. So once a limiting nutrient reaches an optimal level, adding more gives no benefit and can be toxic. So you can't just keep on increasing the slats level for all nutrients. And that's one of the problems that a lot of noobs in hydroponics don't realize is you just can't. Adding more fertilizer and more additives and more bottles doesn't necessarily increase yield. It can become toxic and you can have real problems. And effects are non-linear. So if you add more fertilizer, you spend £10 or twice as much on your fertilizer, you won't get twice as much increase in yield. So there's some other factors that don't really fit into this model. There've been a few attempts to extend the theories of Liebig's law of the minimum. So Shelford's law of tolerance has upper and lower limits, and that takes account of the fact that you can also limit growth. Too much can limit growth. There's multiple limitation hypothesis that looks at interacting limits. So several resources can co-limit simultaneously. The dynamic systems model, time-based and adaptive, limitations change with feedback and adaptation, and ecological stoichiometry. With nutrient ratios, the balance between carbon, nitrogen, phosphorus is key, not just the absolute minimum. The calcium to magnesium ratio, for example, will feed into ecological stoichiometry. However, Shelford's law of tolerance, multiple limitation hypotheses, dynamic system models, and ecological stoichiometry are a lot harder for beginners to get their head around. And so people still talk about Liebig's law of the minimum. And scientists who think that they're scientists, or certainly fertilizer manufacturers who think they're being clever, will still reference Liebig's law of the minimum and try and sound like they know what they're talking about scientifically. But I don't know of any soil scientists who talk about Liebig's law of the minimum. It's a bit like in regenerative agriculture. You know you're talking to a guru or a con man if they start talking about Albrecht and Albrecht ratios. Yes, Albrecht was a scientist, but he was 60 years ago. But a lot of the gurus and charlatans and con men still talk about Albrecht because they can sell lots of products and advice based on those sorts of principles. So yeah, that's been Liebig's law of the minimum. It's useful as a teaching aid, but not essentially the trees, and science has moved on and our understanding of crop nutrition has moved on a lot since then. Let me know what you think. If you think I'm talking absolute nonsense and Liebig's law of the minimum is still valid in your eyes, even at high-level hydroponic growing, then let me know. That's been Hydroponics Daily for today. If you found this interesting, if it's advanced your knowledge of crop nutrition, then please follow the podcast, give an Apple Podcast review. If you listen on any other platform, don't leave us a review because it's pretty much useless. Just check out utrema.co.uk. We have a fantastic periodic table of plant health. I will put it in the show notes so you can click those and you can get yourselves a poster that describes every single plant nutrient, not every single toxin, but some examples of toxins that are on the periodic table, and some beneficial elements and some elements that have no effect on plant growth and are just there as an example. It's a really interesting tool, a really interesting resource, and I think you'll love it. So check that out too. Go on, click the link now. Go on, click it. Cheers. See you tomorrow. Goodbye.